of the Osiris shaft. They got an accurate depiction of that.
For thousands of years, the pyramids have stood as proof of Egypt's genius. But what if their greatest secret lies not in the desert, but across the ocean?
I've heard theories that the pyramids could be a power plant. Is there any validity to that?
Maybe the pyramids are more than one thing. Maybe they're not just one thing.
Could the ancient Egyptians have developed a kind of technology not of flight, but of voyage ships capable of crossing the world long before history admits it was possible? In recent decades, fragments of evidence have begun to surface: carvings, artifacts, and accounts that hint at something extraordinary that the Egyptians, the Chinese, and even the Olmecs of Mexico may once have sailed the same seas, centuries before the age of Columbus. Each time this idea is raised, scholars dismiss it as fantasy. It breaks too many rules, contradicts too many textbooks. After all, we're told that the New World was only discovered in 1492. But what if that story was never true? What if the ancient Egyptians set foot in America thousands of years before Columbus ever lived? And if they did, what else might they have left behind? Because in the early 20th century, a discovery was reportedly made that threatened to rewrite everything we know about the human past. A discovery buried not in Egypt, but in the heart of the Grand Canyon. And it all began with a single man, in a cave no one was supposed to find. On April 5th, 1909, the Arizona Republic, the largest newspaper in the state of Arizona, ran a front-page article with a headline that seemed ordinary enough: explorations in the Grand Canyon. But hidden behind that unassuming title was a story that, if true, could shake the very foundations of human history. The article, nearly 2,000 words long, told the account of an explorer and archaeologist named G.E. Kincaid, a man who, according to his own testimony, had stumbled upon something capable of overturning the entire history of mankind. The report claimed Kincaid was working for the Smithsonian Institution, one of America's most prestigious scientific and cultural organizations, overseeing museums, research centers, and national archives across the country. His mission was simple: to survey the mineral resources of the Grand Canyon region. Kincaid began his journey in Green River, Wyoming, steering a small boat down the Colorado River, bound for the desert town of Yuma, as he drifted between towering walls of red stone. The canyon revealed itself in all its overwhelming grandeur, the echo of water against the cliffs, the cold breath rising from the river, the shifting light painting the rock in shades of fire and shadow. Armed only with a notebook, a pen, and a bulky early camera, Kincaid documented everything he could: the shape of the cliffs, the patterns in the rock, the strange glint of mineral veins in the afternoon sun. The further he went, the narrower the river became, and the louder its current roared, pulling him deeper into the canyon's silent heart. Then, somewhere along a narrow gorge hemmed in by sheer cliffs nearly 1,500 feet high, Kincaid saw a dark opening in the stone, impossibly high above the river. At first it looked like a trick of the light, but then he noticed its shape: precise, symmetrical, unmistakably artificial. An entrance. Curiosity overcame fear. Kincaid moored his boat, began to climb, gripping roots and rock with bare hands as he ascended toward the shadow above. He had no idea that, within moments, he would stand before a discovery and a secret that could change not only his life, but perhaps the history of America itself. While charting the canyon walls through his binoculars, Kincaid noticed something that made him stop rowing. There, on a sheer cliff face rising nearly 1,500 feet above the river, was a small, dark opening. But what truly seized his attention were the faint outlines of steps carved directly into the stone. Curiosity outweighed fear. Against every instinct, Kincaid decided to climb. Using both hands and feet, he inched upward, gripping roots and narrow ledges until his fingers found the edge of the opening. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a single man to slip through, and yet, as he stepped inside, he felt it immediately. The air was different, cooler, older, heavy with the weight of centuries. According to the Arizona Republic article, the passage sloped downward at first, a tunnel nearly 10 feet wide and 50 feet long, descending into darkness before splitting into a Y-shaped corridor. At the junction stood a statue unmistakably Eastern in style, almost Buddhist in form. The sight left Kincaid stunned. Such imagery had no place in Native American history, at least not according to anything the archaeology of his time had ever recorded. From there, the tunnels branched and branched again, twisting through the earth like the roots of some buried tree. Hundreds of chambers opened along the way, rooms carved from solid rock, each roughly the size of a modern living room, connected by a maze of narrow corridors. At the heart of it all lay a vast central hall, large enough to hold hundreds of people. Beside it stood what Kincaid described as a sanctuary, its walls lined with alcoves and intricate reliefs bearing Egyptian and Indian motifs, multi-armed deities, lotus flowers, and symbols of life and rebirth, carved so delicately they looked almost alive. Time, it seemed, had not touched them. Deeper still, he came upon a cylindrical structure about 12 feet high, its walls smooth, as if cast from cement. 2 massive metal hooks hung from its ceiling. Kincaid speculated that they might once have held a ladder or a movable cover long since gone. But what struck him most was the air itself. Despite the depth, it was fresh and steady, as though the entire network was breathing. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a hidden system seemed to pull air through the tunnels, an ancient form of ventilation, engineered with impossible precision. When Kincaid finally reached the deepest point of the complex, he raised his flashlight and froze. The beam illuminated rows of shapes embedded in the stone. They were bodies, dozens of mummies, sealed within carved niches high along the walls, wrapped in linen and bark, their outlines eerily intact. A sharp, resinous odor filled the chamber, but wonder quickly overcame fear. Scattered around them were gray-white metal objects resembling platinum, gold ornaments, pottery, and stone blocks engraved with unknown symbols, all crafted in a style that screamed of ancient Egypt. The article ended with a breathtaking claim that what Kincaid had found was not a mine, nor a natural cave system, but an underground necropolis, or perhaps even a military outpost of ancient Egyptians in North America. If true, it would mean one thing only: that everything we know about the history of humankind would have to be rewritten. When the Arizona Republic first published the story, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Overnight, the nation was gripped. Newsrooms, universities, and amateur archaeologists from across the United States turned their eyes toward Arizona, desperate to uncover more about what was now being called the Egyptian cave beneath America. Within days, the Arizona Republic was overwhelmed. Thousands of letters poured in. Telephones rang nonstop, and the editors, sensing a sensation, decided to publish a second article, this time filled with even bolder claims. According to that follow-up, the walls of the cave were covered in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. A man identified as Professor D.S. Jordan, allegedly a director at the Smithsonian Institution, was said to be overseeing the study of the artifacts. And in his reported words, the relics bore clear and unmistakable Egyptian characteristics both in design and in craftsmanship. The article went further still, declaring that the underground complex was vast enough to house 50,000 people, a buried city, hidden beneath the Grand Canyon. For readers, the idea was staggering. If true, it meant that the Americas had not been discovered by Columbus at all, but rediscovered, long after another civilization had already been there. But then, just as quickly as the story appeared, it began to unravel, within days. Journalists from other papers tried to reach the Smithsonian for comment. What they received instead was a cold, official statement. There is no record of any employee named G.E. Kincaid. No archaeologist named D.S. Jordan has ever been involved in any Smithsonian project in the Grand Canyon. No artifacts, ruins, or evidence of Egyptian presence have ever been found in North America. The effect was immediate and absolute. Within a week, every trace of the story vanished from other publications. No photographs were printed, no documents surfaced, and no one, not a single reporter, researcher, or curious traveler, was ever able to access the area again. Those who tried found every path to the described section of the canyon blocked off, sealed under the justification of safety and environmental protection. From that moment on, the two names G.E. Kincaid and D.S. Jordan disappeared from official Smithsonian records, as if they had never existed at all. And in their place, a strange silence settled, one that, for many, spoke louder than denial itself. Because when history refuses to explain something, people begin to wonder whether it was ever lost, or whether it was hidden on purpose. After the Smithsonian's official denial, most of the public moved on, convinced the story was nothing more than a turn-of-the-century hoax, the kind of exaggerated adventure tale newspapers loved to print. But a few years later, a handful of independent researchers began digging through old archives, and what they uncovered would make the mystery far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The first revelation came with the name D.S. Jordan. Far from being a fabrication, he was very real David Starr Jordan, a celebrated biologist, the founding president of Stanford University, and, most importantly, a longtime scientific collaborator of the Smithsonian Institution. This meant that, despite the Smithsonian's denial, There had been a genuine link between Jordan and the organization all along. The second revelation was even more startling. Within early 20th century Smithsonian administrative files, researchers reportedly found references to a man named G.E. Kincaid, listed as a field agent who had participated in archaeological surveys across the American West for more than 30 years. Some documents even noted that he had been responsible for transporting artifacts from caves in Colorado and Arizona to Washington, D.C. Then came the most haunting clue of all. In several Smithsonian-affiliated museums, there still exist gold, copper, and carved stone artifacts labeled only with the vague description "Origin Unknown, Southwestern United States, early 20th century." When compared to the descriptions from the 1909 article, the resemblance in shape, material, and carving detail was uncanny. These coincidences reignited the question that refused to die if both Kincaid and Jordan were real, and if the artifacts still exist. Then why would the Smithsonian deny everything? One theory suggests that after the cave's discovery, the Smithsonian confiscated all artifacts, sealed the site, and quietly designated it as a restricted preservation zone. Some believe the relics were shipped to Washington, D.C., and buried within the Smithsonian's massive underground archives, a place where more than 90% of the collection is never displayed to the public. It was from here that the infamous rumor took shape: the Smithsonian cover-up. Over the decades, historians, authors, and even former Smithsonian employees have hinted that some discoveries are simply too disruptive to reveal because they would shake the very foundations of modern history. And so, more than a century later, one question still lingers quiet, persistent, and unnerving. Did the Smithsonian deliberately bury the truth about an ancient Egyptian presence hidden in the heart of America? With the rediscovery of records confirming that both G.E. Kincaid and David Starr Jordan were real, and with artifacts emerging that seemed to match the 1909 descriptions with eerie precision, researchers began revisiting an idea long dismissed as pure fantasy, that the ancient Egyptians might have crossed the ocean and reached North America thousands of years before Columbus. Two major theories emerged, one anchored in the science of navigation, the other in the realm of spirit and myth. The first, proposed by historian Jim Bailey, argues that the Egyptians were far more advanced seafarers than conventional history admits. Around 1500 BCE, during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, Egyptian ships were already making long-distance expeditions to a fabled land known as Punt, thought to lie somewhere along the East African coast or the Arabian Peninsula. On the walls of Deir el-Bahari Temple, massive reliefs depict great wooden vessels laden with cargo and cruise ships strong enough to cross open seas, not just the calm waters of the Nile. Bailey suggests that these were not isolated journeys, but evidence of a maritime tradition capable of true exploration. He theorized that from the Red Sea, Egyptian sailors could have followed monsoon winds across the Indian Ocean, been carried by Pacific currents, and eventually reached the western shores of the Americas, perhaps through what is now the Gulf of California. From there, the Colorado River could have pulled them inland, into the heart of the continent, straight toward the Grand Canyon itself. If Bailey's hypothesis is true, then the ancient Egyptians were not just pyramid builders, they were among the first great navigators of the world, crossing oceans 2,000 years before Columbus ever set sail. The second theory takes a more spiritual turn. Anthropologist Stephen Mailer proposed that the connection between Egypt and the American Southwest may not have been physical at all, but cosmic, a meeting of minds, myths, and belief systems separated by oceans, but bound by the same ancient memory. According to Hopi tradition, humanity has lived through 4 worlds, each destroyed by a great cataclysm, one by fire, one by ice, one by flood, before being reborn into the next. In Egyptian cosmology, the same pattern appears: the endless cycle of creation, destruction, and renewal, ruled by the gods of the sun and the underworld. Mailer pointed out that both civilizations worshipped the sun as the source of all life, believed in the immortality of the soul, and practiced ritual burials or mummification to prepare for the afterlife. Even more startling are the petroglyphs carved into the canyon walls of the American Southwest spirals. Eyes, winged figures, symbols nearly identical to those found in ancient Egyptian temples, each representing transformation and eternity. If these parallels are more than coincidence, Mailer suggested, then perhaps long ago, a small group of Egyptian priests or travelers crossed the sea, arriving in the lands of the Hopi. There, they might have shared their sacred geometry, their stories of cyclical worlds, and their belief that the soul endures beyond death, planting seeds of a memory that still survives in myth. Whether through oceanic mastery or spiritual resonance, both theories lead to the same haunting conclusion: that the story of civilization is not a straight line, beginning in one land and ending in another, but a vast, interconnected web, far older and far more unified than we have ever been allowed to believe. If the story published in 1909 was true, if G.E. Kincaid had truly uncovered a vast underground complex filled with artifacts unmistakably Egyptian, then one question remains impossible to ignore. Why would the Smithsonian, one of the world's most trusted scientific institutions, go to such lengths to deny it ever happened? Over the decades, independent researchers and investigative writers have put forward two leading explanations, each disturbing in its own way. One speaks of power, the other of control over truth itself. The first theory paints a picture of greed and authority. At the dawn of the 20th century, America was still expanding westward. Archaeological discoveries rich in gold, gems, or relics of unknown origin were often seized by federal authorities under the vague banner of national security. According to some accounts, the so-called Kincaid Cave was not simply an archaeological site, but a vault of unimaginable wealth said to contain so much gold that it could flow like a river. If that were true, the Smithsonian, empowered by government mandate, could easily have stepped in, confiscated the artifacts, sealed the site, and classified it under federal protection. Officially, the reason would have been to prevent looting or panic. Unofficially, it would have been to keep the treasure and the story under lock and key. But even this dramatic version struggles to hold weight. The Smithsonian is a federal institution subject to congressional oversight. The idea that it could quietly seize a golden hoard of that scale without leaving a trace seems almost impossible, which leads to a second theory, one that many consider far more unsettling. This second explanation argues that the Smithsonian's motives were not material, but intellectual. The institution may not have been protecting treasure, but protecting the very foundations of modern knowledge. Because if the Grand Canyon discovery were real, it would overturn everything the scientific world believes about human history. It would mean the ancient Egyptians had mastered transoceanic navigation 3,000 years before Columbus, that ancient civilizations exchanged ideas and technologies across continents, and that the established story of human migration as taught in classrooms worldwide would have to be rewritten from the ground up. Such a revelation wouldn't just challenge archaeology, it would destabilize anthropology, history, religion, even the very idea of progress. Entire systems of belief, academic and spiritual alike, could collapse under the weight of that truth. And so, according to this view, the Smithsonian did what powerful institutions have always done when faced with something too disruptive to explain it: buried it. Records were erased, witnesses discredited, access to the site quietly restricted, and the story of G.E. Kincaid, along with everything he may have found, vanished into silence. One alleged former Smithsonian employee, speaking anonymously in a short 1998 interview, offered a chilling reflection that has since become legend. There are things that don't fit the model we're allowed to believe, and when something threatens that system, it gets put away forever. Perhaps that is the real reason. Not gold, not greed, but a truth so vast, so paradigm-shattering, that the only way to protect the world's history was to hide it. If the cave that G.E. Kincaid claimed to have found truly exists, then everything we think we know about human history would have to be rewritten. It would mean that the ancient Egyptians once crossed the ocean, that the Americas were never truly a new world, and that the great civilizations of the past were connected in ways modern history has never dared to imagine. And yet, more than a century later, the Smithsonian remains silent. No excavation has ever been announced. No photographs have surfaced. No official reports. No witnesses. No trace. All that remains is a single, yellowed newspaper article, a story erased from the record, and a fracture in history that no one seems willing to touch. Perhaps the truth lies buried somewhere beneath the Grand Canyon, sealed behind layers of stone and time, or perhaps it rests quietly in Washington, D.C., hidden in one of the Smithsonian's vast storage vaults among the millions of artifacts labeled, cataloged, and locked away from public view. Either way, the mystery refuses to die. It lingers like a question that no one can quite silence. Was there truly an ancient Egyptian city beneath the Grand Canyon? And if there was, why are we not allowed to know? Maybe history isn't a straight line of progress, but a circle, a repeating cycle in which civilizations rise, shine, and fall, leaving only echoes behind. And perhaps we, too, are simply another turn of that same eternal wheel. If Kincaid's discovery was real, then we are not the first civilization to know this world, only the last one that remembers. Because in the end, truth is known only when what was buried is finally brought to light. So what do you believe? Was this nothing more than a forgotten newspaper hoax, or the greatest archaeological cover-up in American history? Tell me what you think in the comments below, because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried forever.